I'm proud and grateful to be able to serve in the cabinet of the Prime Minister. And I really don't spend a lot of time focusing on Ottawa gossip. My focus is on doing what I can to serve Canada and Canadians in what's a really challenging time for our country.
The Scrum is here to talk about that. Najoud Almalise is a reporter with the Canadian Press. Robert Fife is the Ottawa bureau chief for the Globe and Mail. And Nick Nanos is the chief data scientist and founder of Nanos Research. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you.
Hey.
Bob, I got to start with you. That's your story, yours and Marika's, in the Globe and Mail that you broke this week. Your assessment of how this ends for Chrystia Freeland. Do you think she's still in the position of finance minister at week's end?
Well, that's a good question, because we're hearing there's going to be a cabinet shuffle on Wednesday. People are being very careful about whether Mr. Carney is coming in. When you try to reach out to Mr. Carney's people, none of them are returning their phone calls anymore, which sort of a sign that maybe he is actually going to accept this job. Now, whether it is the finance role or some super role in terms of dealing with the United States, or a combination of both, I don't know. But, you know, your viewers just saw the statement from Ms. Freeland when she was asked about that, and she was quite emotional. I think frankly, she teared up. So she clearly, I think her days as finance minister are probably numbered, and that it looks like Mr. Carney may be coming back. I don't want to put that on the line because we don't know for certain, but it's a really good possibility that that's going to happen. And so what's the whole point of this economic statement then on Monday? Because
Final hurrah? I don't know.
I mean, really, when you think about it, right?
Well, let's talk about that for a second. And just, Najoud, you've covered Minister Freeland for a long time. You've covered the portfolio for a long time. The reporting that Bob and Marika did was very much around tension that I told Bill Morneau earlier in the show. I felt like I had deja vu to 4.5 years ago, right? This idea that there's tension over how much or kind of the level of spending between the finance minister's office and the prime minister's office. Is that your read of it?
Well, I think no one was really that shocked to hear that there would be this kind of rift between the PMO and the finance minister. I mean, Minister Freeland listens to economists, even if the government doesn't always do what economists tell them to do, but she likes coming out and saying, we understand, we want to be fiscally responsible, we want to promote economic growth. Now, the policies don't always line up with that, but at least her rhetoric does. And you know, she was the one to come out last fall and say, hey, we're going to put out all these fiscal guardrails, we're going to help the Bank of Canada know that we're not going to go awry with spending, and we're going to let them fight inflation. And that was applauded by the Bank of Canada, and now she's having to walk that back. I mean, she hasn't said that they broke the deficit promise yet, but
she's all but said
she all but said it. Exactly. And so now she's having to walk back on that promise. She's put in an awkward position right now. But ultimately, PMO is dealing with real political pressures that are probably going to supersede the finance minister's concerns about spending.
Look, she has been, Nick, a huge part of the Trudeau government, like side by side with the prime minister now on every big thing I can think of them doing, even before she was finance minister, as foreign affairs minister, renegotiating NAFTA. In your view, if she is shuffled out, how big of a deal is that?
I think it's a massive deal. Like, has she done anything wrong? Has she done anything unethical? I think it sounds like she's just disagreed with the prime minister. You know, in the past, finance ministers have disagreed with prime ministers, and they've been able to work it out and have a path forward. You know, what we've learned today, at least, is that perhaps disagreeing with the prime minister is enough to put your job at risk. And, you know, the other thing is it just me, or is the Liberal government turning into a bad political game show, like calling Mark Carney for a lifeline in order to save themselves? You know, from a polling perspective, it's kind of like they're 8 feet underwater, and they think that if they bring back Mark Carney that things are going to improve, but maybe they'll just be 7 feet underwater. The reality is the Liberals are still politically drowning, whether they bring back Mark Carney or not.
I want to just quickly to follow up, because is there the possibility that Mark Carney does do anything for them? And the second part of it is, he has been pre-positioned as a replacement for Trudeau. Like, does, you know, based on the polling you've done so far, and I know you've done some for us on possible replacement, replacements, like where does he stack up?
Well, he stacks up at the top, but still none of the above is pretty popular as a replacement to be the next Liberal Party leader. But a lot of this has to do with him being an outsider. But the reality is that this lead, I'm not going to say it's insurmountable, but it's a massive advantage that the Conservatives have, almost 20 percentage points, and it's going to take more than shuffling the decks, shuffling the chairs around, or the cabinet ministers, or having a new finance minister, whether it's Mark Carney or anyone else, to do things. There needs to be some sort of fundamental change in direction. And if not, the Liberals are going to slam up against a blue wave led by Pierre Poilievre.
Bob, Nick just mentioned the word outsider. I mean, that has been the reality for Mark Carney somewhat until the summer, when your initial reporting then led to him becoming sort of like an economic advisor through the party apparatus. Have you been able to figure out, I guess, the advantage Mark Carney sees, or the people around him, in actually getting into the fold rather than staying a few feet away?
Look, it's a head scratcher, because what we know when Bill Morneau ended up being pushed out because he was resisting the spending from the Prime Minister's office, we know that the Finance Department and Ms. Freeland have been resisting the GST and the rebate gimmick, vote buying gimmick, because it was going to make it more difficult for her to keep the deficit to $40 billion, which is a huge embarrassment for her, because she had that red line in the sand. So why would Mark Carney come into a situation where that all they can think about in the Prime Minister's office is how to spend and how to do politics and how to try to recover from the dismal polls? And Mr. Carney is a incredibly accomplished man. I mean, he would be probably a great Prime Minister and undoubtedly a good finance minister, but you can't be a good finance minister because your boss is the Prime Minister and all he cares about is spending. So I don't understand it. It truly is a head scratcher.
Yeah,
but Bob, how about if Justin Trudeau tells Mark Carney, I'm not running in the next election. I'm going to bring you in as finance minister.
Right.
You can have a chance to run.
Right.
I'd
want that written down and stone.
Yeah, like I don't believe it, first of all, but also
You're not very trusting?
I guess also for me the question is, like, again, do you see more closely associating yourself with the Trudeau brand as an advantage if you're going to replace him? Because the consensus seems to be, based on polling like yours, that it might be a vulnerability, actually. Anyway, obviously they're coming up with their own conclusions. So Jude, I wanted to ask you about the subtext of all this, which is the fall economic statement, the prospect of going beyond that the $40 billion deficit figure, the so-called one of the two fiscal anchors that had been set out. How likely do you feel that is, based on what we've heard from the finance minister? And what else are you watching for in that document?
Well, I think economists are widely expecting that deficit is going to come in at least a few billion, maybe more than that, higher than the $40 billion that was promised. Minister Freeland had multiple chances to respond to questions about whether she would meet that target, and she said she chose her words carefully by not responding. So I think that's quite clear there. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this affects her credibility and the government's credibility. Again, how much credibility is there already for this government on spending and their promises on spending? But this is just going to be another example of just breaking a promise or making a promise that you were never going to follow through on. I think the other interesting angle to the fall economic statement is going to be the fact that this is coming a few weeks before Donald Trump's inauguration and comes at a time when he continues to threaten 25% tariffs. How will the Liberal government respond to this? You heard a little bit from the finance minister already on how they think they're going to do that, particularly by trying to promote investment in the country. We've heard from various premiers, but to kind of see whether they actually lay out any elements of their plan to respond, and also their forecasting. The government has to present upside and downside scenarios for their economic and fiscal forecasts. How are they going to take into account the threat of tariffs and what that would do to the economy and public finances?
Yeah, there could be a headline there if they think the economy is going to go into a recession, Nick.
Well,
but
Stephen Pollitt's the former
he already, he
says
said
we are in one.
Yeah, and the current one wouldn't go there. Mr. Macklem this week. I'll give you the last word, Nick. Does this document matter politically for the government?
Oh, it will matter because they're going to be on the defense. Usually governments want to use these to build momentum, to build confidence and stuff like that. they were on the defense going into this. They're going to be on the defense related to HST, the check that they wanted to send out that they're not sending out currently, on the deficit, all those things. So I don't know what the good news is going to be out of this fiscal statement, at least if you're a Liberal. You know, the reality is they're providing fodder for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to hammer them in the House of Commons, which will happen.
Well, not for too long, because the House rises the next day, which perhaps might be part of it. Okay, thanks everyone. Appreciate it. Our Sunday Scrum, Nick Nanos, Bob Fife, and Najoud Al-Malise. Coming up, the 3 things I'm watching for next week. Don't go anywhere.